All right, welcome to the Helm Developer Call on December 3rd, 2020. So we will start out with any announcements, and we have Bridget with an announcement about patch release.
I put an announcement on here that I think Farina may have some words to say about, but I did add it, and it's about the upcoming patch release on Wednesday, December 9th, 3.4.2. Farina, what still needs to happen?
There's a few things in the milestone that need to be reviewed. And we need to catch to see if there's any other pull requests or if anybody wants to jump on one of the open bugs to get it in there. For those of you who aren't a maintainer, if you want an easy thing, go through some of the bugs in the issue queue that could go into 3.4.2 and see if you want to take a shot at trying to fix them to get a pull request in. But we probably need it in by Tuesday at the latest, given that Wednesday is when we cut the release. But for the maintainers, please go review the PRs that are either just in the backlog of pull requests to see if they go in 3.4.2 or the ones that are already in 3.4.2. And if somebody who hasn't done a release yet as a maintainer wants to ride along, you got to be a Helm maintainer. Feel free to reach out to me and we can ride along and you can get a little better at this and you can learn what's going on, because I'm happy to have others who also do this.
What day, Matt? What day
This is on Wednesday.
So you wanna, if I shadow you, it would be the Wednesday?
It would be Wednesday when we do the release.
Okay. I'll reach out to you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. For our discussion topics, we have several things on the agenda. Bridget, do you want to go forward with that docs one?
Oh yeah, this one hopefully should be pretty easy or short, which is just one of the colleagues on my team actually pointed out that he was going to point to something and then realized, oh, all of our examples are deprecated. The reason we haven't changed them all yet is because we were thinking about where to change them. Adam and I had talked about, and I don't know if Adam is on the call today, but it doesn't look like he is, but we had talked about at a meeting a few meetings ago about the idea of having a place for examples, but it's not like Helm, github.org Helm charts that we're maintaining. It's more like something more like the chart release, chart testing repos, maybe chart examples, just so that we can have a place that instead of changing all the docs so that this part of the docs points to some JFrog chart and this part of the doc points to some Bitnami chart. And then we have to constantly worry about whether or not people have moved our cheese when we just want to have an example, not an authoritative chart. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of check with the group as to how people feel about that being like a source for something for us to put in the docs, not a production ready thing people will use forever.
So two things come to mind as possibilities. One, we could take something like Chart Museum and tweak it to be a really good example, and then point to that as something, and then they get a look at another one of the projects. Or we could create an examples repository with just one or two examples in it. And we call it something like example charts. And in the README, we say these are not production ready. This is just meant to get you started and illustrate some best practices. And in those, we do the things we think are the best practices, and the charts maintainers can do that. Maybe we even, I don't know, use provenance files and sign them and that kind of thing. And then we can document using those how to do it. We could set up both a registry and we could use GHCR to do the OCI version, and you show people how to install it either way.
I like your second version, mostly because it doesn't require us to kludge together two things with slightly different purposes. It's not like we have a significant shortage of extra repos we can create under our org. And I like the idea of having one that's scoped just to examples.
So can we call it just examples and then have a charts directory in case we want to show other examples?
Do we plan on having examples of things other than charts?
I'm thinking, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if we're going to have examples of something else, because we'll put CI on this and things like that, I would probably give it its own repo so it can have its own independent CI if I were going to do it. So I would probably call something like chart examples or example charts. And then if we're going to have a different kind of examples, have a different repo, because I would like to do things like have CI do testing, and we use chart testing for it just to show an example. And if you're doing subdirectories with different examples, your CI gets pretty complicated if you're using something like GitHub Actions.
I was
Okay.
thinking things like post render things, but I guess those can be in example charts, right?
And then the other big thing we would need is which things do we use as example charts?
I mean, yeah, these sound like implementation details and there's a bunch of stuff on the agenda. So I don't want to take the entire time to talk about the details, but it sounds like Farina and I both have opinions about it and are interested in this. So shall we say after the holidays, this is a project for us?
Sounds good to me.
I'd be happy to help out. It sounds like fun.
That's good. All right.
Awesome. All right, Mark, do you want to talk about post render arguments?
Yeah, I don't know much about the post renderer, so I might be missing something. But somebody pointed out that you can't pass it any arguments in the current format. You can create a file that has all the arguments for you, and you just call that script. You could do that. But so he posted a PR to improve on it. But I'm concerned about backwards compatibility, and I don't know if I'm being overly careful or not. So I don't know if you can see the notes because I put currently you pass a flag that has post render and you would put in one command. Now what we were thinking of doing is allowing post render and then you give the whole command with arguments and then we'd split on the spaces. But then for backwards compatibility, I was wondering if technically you could have a binary that has a space in it. So we would be breaking those, but that's a weird, I mean, who names their binary with a space? So I don't know.
Is it just binaries with a space or the path with a space? Because if it's the path to the binary with a space.
Path, all right, you're right, path.
Yeah,
good.
so lots of operating systems have paths, and that's actually a pretty common thing. I don't have it in like my user working directory, but just think on a Mac, application support, right?
You're right,
Application
yeah.
space support. It's really common. And so that would be my worry about breaking things on a space there. If anything, what I would suggest somebody do in this case is have their script use environment variables and then use environment variables to pass in your arguments. That would be my first one-off because it would work today.
Say that again.
Use environment variables.
Yeah, but
instead of
how would
arguments, pass it in as environment variables.
Oh.
Wait, no, post render wouldn't pass those along, would it? Or does it? I have to look. I don't even know.
Well, basically the flag takes the argument of the flag. So let's say customize, and it calls it. So if you were to write customize space a flag for customize or some parameter, it would just assume that's the whole binary name, and it's going to say, oh, I can't find customize space blah 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 blah. So the idea was to say I want to be able to treat the first argument as the binary name, the next argument as an argument, and so on. But you're right that in that case we'd be splitting on space. If the path contains a space, it would screw things up. So if we want to be really careful about backwards compatibility, I think we need like a flag that would be post renderer args, and then do it separately. I'm not sure if that becomes too complex and just we fall back to saying, look, sorry, we didn't think about it before, and you just have to write a script that includes your arguments.
I would vote to have the flag because you're not always in control of the binary that you're using, and you can't require that it understands environment variables like Farina's talking about. I think we can have a recommendation. You should just use environment variables if you control the binary, or the script. But I think having the flag would be useful for the edge case.
The specific one is customized as part of kubectl. So people want to call kubectl space customize space arguments, and that doesn't work. So, okay, well, at least, okay, thank you for answering the backwards compatibility. So I don't think we should change it. It could break usages. I'll mention that in the PR, and then we can see where we go from there. Thank you.
All right. Next is size labels.
All right, this one's me. So we do these size labels. In fact, Helm, and some of the other repositories have reviewer counts and things that has to happen based on the size of things, right? The Helm hub, I'm in the process of tearing down the last of it because in the last week we handed off the DNS for hub.helm.sh to Artifact Hub so they can handle the redirect. So we don't have to maintain any infrastructure for that anymore. It's just part of their existing infrastructure. And in tearing all of that down, most of the stuff in there was there either to support the charts repo automation or the Helm hub. But one of the things that's there is that's where all of our size labels come from. There's a webhook that fires off to an app that I wrote that runs in that cluster that then comes back and adds your size label to everything. And I'd like to tear this down because for the most part, that code hasn't been touched in so long. There's actually obsoleted repos that sit in front of that repo of code. And so I was thinking that maybe a better way to do this would be to move it to a GitHub action that we can apply to the repositories as necessary, and anybody could use it. And so we take it out of a long-running service we need and port it into a GitHub action instead. And I wanted to kind of pick up what people thought about that. I'll write the code.
I mean, if it's any consolation, the current GitHub Actions that we've been running for quite some time has been quite reliable. We haven't had any like downtime or any issues. They've been scheduled on a pretty regular schedule. Like the stale bot has been running quite well. There's a couple of bugs here and there with and that's particular to the action itself. But the actual operation is running as expected, which is great.
Well, is the stale bot an action? I thought that was a service.
There's two. There's the service and then there's the action. And we're currently using the action.
I see.
We're not using the service.
I've forgotten. Okay. Yeah. And so I was thinking of doing something like this, and then I would come into the repositories that needed it. Probably every repository we had to add it at first once it proves itself. So, and then we can tear down that whole cluster and everything around it, which is probably the easiest way. And it takes some maintenance and cost burden off of us too.
Yeah, and the versioning, or the part of like being able to version the whole sizing action and everything else, so then you can say if you want to optimize it for certain use cases or add new feature flags in the future, then everyone else doesn't have to get updated or things like that. You just have to go eventually to the GitHub Actions workflow YAML and update to the new version of the sizing bot. So yeah, I'm all for this. Actions has been great for these kind of use cases.
Okay, then I'll start working on that. That's it.
All right, Matt, you are the next topic as well.
Yeah, I was going to
Translation
bring up
PRs.
the translation PRs. I've started to go through them, and I've noticed that on a pull request, you might have 3 or 4 or more people who are working on the pull request and there are commits in there. And then one of the people who contributed commits to it is the person who LGTMs it. And so I just wanted folks' take on it. And we may already have something on this, but I haven't really done much with it, so I didn't know.
I put some notes in the doc about it because I have done a bunch with this, and I have seen what you're talking about, but a lot more frequently, you have one person who does a lot of the translation, then someone else comes in and nitpicks some and then does the LGTM. I actually would prefer if we can get some of those people who are doing the vetting and then the, nitpicking and then the LGTM, if we can get them elevated to be docs maintainers so that they can merge their own stuff and I don't have to check it, that'd be great. I put some notes in here about how I think we need to formalize a little bit more the last final check of the final translation versus the original English. Because I think sometimes that's where it gets lost because people fork and they fork like, a month before we do a big docs change. And so then they do a translation of the previous version. And so like a check against what's current before you send it through is, I think, that a step we need to formalize. Anyway, that's kind of, like I said, I have probably more than anyone else. I've spent a lot of time on this from the, I'm merging a bunch of them and trying to make sure we have good checking. And that's what I've noticed. But
Do we, when I haven't looked at translations at all, so I know nothing about this, but do we tag like the date when a translation is based on of in the translation, so that if you're looking at the translation, you can see like, oh, this thing's from 6 months ago, something might have drifted in between there, you know?
Yeah, there's not really a mechanism to do that formally because it's just a question of when people like forked.
Yeah, okay. It would be, I think it would be good if maybe we could require on translations to say like, put like this translation is good as of this date, because the documentation is always going to change and the translations are always going to lag behind. And so at least if you can see the date of when the translation is from, you can go look at the docs, you can get an idea of like, oh, okay, there might be some stuff that's out of date here. And then maybe we could even like come up with a way to like say like flag stuff that's over a certain number of commits behind or something, to say like, oh, docs have changed substantially, this translation may be out of date.
Hey, you want to help work on that? Pull requests. Welcome.
Maybe.
Do we have a process for when we, for those of us, when we update the doc in English, should we flag somewhere that, hey, you know, this update should be, this PR should be looked at by somebody who does the Korean translation, or?
No.
This is it would be great if we even updated the docs in English phase. So
It has
first we
happened.
update the docs in English, then we have a process for telling people it happened. Like the first one has to be ever happening.
How many other languages do we have the docs in?
Japanese, Chinese, and Korean currently,
Jeez.
but amounts are varied. Anyway, we don't have to go into a ton of detail on this, but have we gotten towards your original question, Farina?
I think you have. And I also think that anybody here who's interested in easy contributions and might be interested in translations or documentation, to see Bridget, because she's got ideas and there's room for work.
I don't know if I'm ready to volunteer to go build the thing that I suggested, but I would probably be ready to volunteer to do some investigation and gather some stuff from Bridget and talk to some of the people that are doing translations, and maybe come back with a recommendation, at least based on what people are saying.
Okay, cool.
Josh, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, there are 2 more items that have been added to the agenda, but I want to use my moderator privilege to call out an announcement I think should have been on here. Bridget and Matt Fisher won a CNCF award for chop wood, carry water, and I think that's much deserved, and I think we should applaud them for that.
I think that
So
so well deserved.
very, very well deserved.
That was the second biggest story behind whether or not the taxes were going to be released. I think that was the most discussed part of that presentation. And people were asking for him to release his taxes. I think he should do it.
That being said, I'm not surprised, because they are both very very active, especially with Helm. So don't want to embarrass you, but just wanted to give the credit.
And Josh, if I may, as a new maintainer, I want to say that if it wasn't for people like you who respond to contributions, I would have dropped off thinking, okay, this is too difficult, it wasn't interesting. And it's your constant, you know, feedback that makes people want to stick around. So bravo.
All right, back to the agenda. We have Daniel with an issue with action list client.
Hey, thanks. Oh, okay, my video is working. Yeah, I use the action list client, and I for a long time I was using it to list all of the releases, and I didn't realize until seeing seeing some issues during some testing, that it wasn't actually returning all of the releases. And I think there's just a logic bug in the implementation. And yeah, I wrote a failing unit test to demonstrate that list all won't return all releases. And I guess I'm just wondering, if there's something in the CLI that might depend on the sort of the bug in the in this list client, because I think if I want to fix the list client, I would want to first make sure that the CLI continues to work as is. So if anybody's familiar with that,
I'm
that's
actually
consumed.
quite familiar with this, Daniel. So the Helm CLI does rely on that. So you're referring particularly to the state mask and how it's referring to like how it's filtering out releases and getting that information out. So we use that state mask in the action package, which you're aware of, but then the command line client, if you look under the CMD directory, it's cmd/helm/list.go. That's where it actually calls that action and will grab the releases that are returned from that action and then actually displays that on standard out. I believe the state mask is what filters out all the releases and provides that information. But there might be some bugs in the state mask's like actual intended implementation for that to all work. So the one thing that I would mention is that we have had issues with the state mask in the past. Some people have had conflicting design questions about how the state mask should work. Should it grab only the latest releases? Should it grab all releases? And how that design is fully worked. So there might be a couple of like design concerns there in terms of like backwards compatibility. But I'm fully aware like the state mask should probably get fixed. It's just a matter of how do we address backwards compatibility in some ways. And if you're concerned about the compatibility towards Helm list, there is a list-test.go file that actually does like a golden file of what should be returned and everything else. So that would be a really good place to look at if you're running the unit tests. Normally, if you make changes to the state mask and run unit tests, that should tell you if it changes the output of Helm list, the CLI part itself. So that should help you out in that regard.
Okay. Thanks. I'll start there.
Yeah, it was kind of
All
weird.
right.
Currently, it was weird because currently, no matter how you mask it, you can never get to tell. You can never mask it in such a way that it'll give you everything.
All right, before we go on to, oh, Mark, I thought you had a topic, maybe not.
I dropped
anything-
it off because I thought
Okay.
maybe we could open the floor if we have extra time.
Okay, really quick, we still need people for triage and notes for next week, or triage for this week, notes for next week. So if you can enter that. Is there any other topics people wanted to discuss with our last 5 minutes? All right. Guess that concludes the call for today. Hope everybody has a good rest of the day, and we will see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.